Holy Week story, When the Human and the Holy Collide. Chapter 1.
My office window overlooked the center square in one of Jerusalem's busiest districts. I usually enjoyed the clamor of the market below, the hum of business and the clash of cultures with the background music to the hours I spent at that desk combing my accounts and reconciling numbers. Every time the numbers added up to more profits for me, I thanked the gods of the market below for my favor. But that day, the noise was different. The sounds of trade, barter, and livestock were drowned out by indignant voices and shocked, extended conversations in the few secluded corners of the market floor. Even the livestock seemed hushed by the atmosphere. Initially, I thought nothing of it. The market was always an amalgamation of people, rich, poor, Jew, Greek, religious zealots, and Roman centurions clanging their way to their posts. It was nothing unusual for tempers to flare or disagreements to turn physical. But then, I heard the bronzed plates of the guard's armor come to silence at my door below. It was then that I was drawn out of my numerical reverie. I could hear the voice of my assistant Marcus as he greeted the guards. He sounded upset and insistent in whatever he was trying to convey to the men. Before I could rise from my desk to inquire about the conversation, I hear the military regalia recede from my doorstep and the rushed slapping of Marcus's leather sandals as he ascended the stairs 2 at a time. He was not normally one to break protocol as my subordinate, always a step behind my right shoulder when we were inspecting the market stand, diligently respectful of title and privilege, almost to the point of sycophant. At this particular moment, though, all protocol was forgotten. To my surprise, he burst through the double doors of my office. Each swung back so hard they slammed into the wall behind. One created a small cloud from my expensive plaster as it rotated back to rest. He informed me the centurions had been tasked with checking on Roman citizens and their households, as they had reports of several Romans missing since the events in the city yesterday. Those events involving Jews from all corners of the city making a big fuss over some guy entering the gates of Jerusalem. The Jews. Let's just say that most of my people from back home thought I was crazy for moving to that teeming city of Jewish reverence. They didn't see the profits I saw in keeping that mass of filthy people in need of something only I could provide. Now, 10 years later, those dust breathers have brought me a lot of comfort in that city. That doesn't mean their religious zealotry made any kind of sense to me. I lost way too much money on the days their laws said they couldn't shop or carry the goods they bought back to their hovels. That God they served, all the rules and requirements, and their religious leaders dared to say that they were chosen over us Greeks. Some chosen people, scratching and saving every dime from their laborious jobs in my fields and at my product stands and paying taxes to my government. Sure, you're chosen. If it weren't for the money they spent at my market stands, I'd have had little tolerance for them. And the previous day was a test of my patience. The markets were emptied of shoppers, and the next thing we knew, all the palm trees from outside the gates of Jerusalem were stripped of their branches, and all those Jews had lined up to dance around for some hero of theirs riding a donkey. They acted like this man was going to make them prosperous. You could hear it in their cheers about a Messiah, a Savior, a King. I give them one thing, that kind of talk was gutsy with all the Roman guards within earshot. Marcus even shared with me that there were rumors that this man was from Nazareth. What a hole of a town. No king ever came out of that place. These Jews were hopeful to a fault. Their religious texts taught about this Messiah to come, and every man that claims a miracle is their next best chance at taking my home, my wealth, and my status. I did find it interesting how much this latest guy seemed to get under the skin of the Jewish religious leaders. They stationed themselves in the middle of the market almost every day to preach about how he's leading good Jewish people astray by claiming to be nothing less than God. Well, their God, not mine. Let the little man pretend to be God all he wanted. He just better not think to take that savior status up against the might of the Roman Empire. We had solutions for people that caused a political uprising. If his Jewish elders wouldn't put him in his place, Rome sure would. So the Jews held their little party at the gates and created all kinds of havoc for the good Roman citizens left in the city. My wife was scared this was the beginning of some kind of coup. Half of my household hid behind our doors and refused to go about the daily business I expected of them. Some of them must have been so scared they stayed home, as I never even saw them at their stations yesterday. Managing all the daily housework was Marcus's job, though. I got my meals on time, and my bed linens were clean at bedtime, so I just assumed he found a way to make it all work. The day came and went with only a little bit of profit loss to deal with, so I never thought more of what those Jews were doing yesterday. But as I sat there at my desk, trying with great effort to understand what Marcus was trying to convey, I realized that commotion yesterday has bled over into the new day. 2 of my household staff hadn't returned. These were good Roman stewards that had served me faithfully for years. Marcus even sent a messenger to their home that morning to inquire about them, but the homes were empty when they arrived. The city watch had gotten wind that among the Romans missing, these 2 were part of my household. The guards at my door came to lay the responsibility for the disappearance of these men at my feet. It was apparently now my job to find them, on top of everything else I must deal with. Those rotten Jews. I blame them for all of it.
Jerusalem had always been the seat of Jewish culture and religion. Tradition was honored there. It was revered there. Father had spent decades rising in the ranks of the Jewish eldership, and his efforts were seen pay out in the respect he had at the temple and in my upcoming betrothal to Hava, the daughter of Malachi. Malachi was a very wealthy landowner on the outskirts of the city. Mother said so many times how blessed she was, with this match. I was only a few months away from stepping out on my own as a respected young religious leader myself. Father had spent so much time grooming me to know the Torah and to connect with other leaders in the faith. They knew me by name and talked well of me. For that, my father was very proud. I felt the weight of what it meant to be the firstborn son of my family. There were a lot of expectations I had to fill, and Father and Mother reminded me of that often. For my younger brother, Jacob, things were very different. He was always getting into trouble. He would tell me often how much he appreciated me for taking on the mantle of the family so he could do whatever he wanted. He reveled in pushing Father's buttons, of which there were many. But up to that point, his actions were more of that of a petulant 16-year-old and less outright defiance. Mother often commented on our differences by saying that the 9 years that separated us seemed wider than the river Moses parted. I hated to admit it, but I sometimes delighted in the stories Jacob would tell me about his mischief. I guess I lived vicariously through his antics. See, I knew I carried too many responsibilities to have any of my own. But that day, the dynamics in our home took an irrevocable turn. You see, Jacob hadn't returned after disappearing yesterday. See, no matter what he got himself into in the past, he had always returned home. He may have been sleep deprived as he joined the family for breakfast, but he was there. That morning, his plate grew cold as my mother's fears grew harder for her to bear. Father stormed around our home talking about what this could do to our family and how would it look to the elders and the teachers at the temple. You could see it on my mother's face that she was worried that Malachi would find out and not want his daughter tied to a family that can't control their own children. You see, I just sat there, pushing my food around on a plate, knowing my father was about to task me with the recovery of my wayward brother. I would be spending my day searching the holes and the hovels of Jerusalem for this irresponsible kid. Thanks, Jacob. That's just exactly what I wanted to do with my day. Father sent Mother next door to cry on the shoulder of our neighbor, Sarah. who was an old widow that had been taken in by our family. Sarah had time for tears. Father did not. He turned to me and told me to pack a small bag of tradable goods and go get our caretaker Asher. We'd be combing the streets of Jerusalem until we found the boy and brought him home. Father stormed off to go do damage control among the local leadership at the temple stairs. I ran out to the larder to grab the trade items before connecting with Asher, who was always in the garden at this time of day. But as I came back into the main room of the house, the door slammed open and in ran Jacob, wrapped in a gust of dust and dirt that I knew that my mother would complain about endlessly. Disheveled as he was grinning from ear to ear. Out of breath, he greeted me as if nothing unusual had transpired in the past day. I stood there in complete silence as he relayed to me where he had been. I knew there was a group of Jewish people that had made a huge fuss yesterday at the city gates. Father had talked many times of news he had heard through his connections about this new man claiming to be the Messiah. He often laughed about how many people in his lifetime had tried to claim themselves as the Messiah, and how this new guy was from Nazareth, and how hilarious it was that someone would think our Messiah would come from Nazareth, of all places. And I won't even go into the kinds of people he was rumored to hang around. Father would relay the teachings of a rabbi about how the Messiah would have respect and authority, and about how he would come to free us from our bondage. He knew to do this, Messiah could not come from such a place as lowly as Nazareth. It was laughable. But even so, this guy had managed to convince enough people of his messiahhood that they threw this big celebration yesterday when he entered the city. Father said he even rode a donkey to claim the holy scriptures from Zechariah about our coming king. He and the other elders were livid. Rarely did the elders pay attention to the messiahhood claims of crazy men. They came too often to continually address each incident. And besides, they rarely ever pulled many good Jewish people from the faith of their fathers to worry about. The previous day was different, though. Father said the streets were filled with our Jewish brothers and sisters. All were chanting and waving palm branches before this guy. The words Messiah, King, Savior were just tossed around brazenly in front of our faith leaders and Roman authorities alike. Father said it was like our people had abandoned their senses altogether. By the way he described it, I never would have thought that something this outlandish would impact our family. Even with all of Jacob's antics in the past, we always managed to walk the line of being a respected Jewish family. Which is why I was so shocked when Jacob excitedly shared with me that he had spent the night out in a field somewhere among the followers of this guy named Jesus that was claiming to be the Messiah. Jacob said he and a few friends had gone down to the city gates to just see what kind of misadventures this new commotion would afford them. He heard people talking about a Messiah and how the Romans would get it. Others stood in awe, waving branches they had ripped off from the palm trees, tears pouring down their face as they watched this guy ride by on a donkey. Jacob and his friends found all of this hero worship very laughable and got a kick from playing along. Soon, they were climbing trees and to grab more branches to toss into the path of the donkey, snickering and just laughing at their own comedic genius. Seeing that he was about to pass the area they were in, they quickly grabbed the closest branches and rushed out to throw them on the ground, making a big scene doing so. And at the very last minute, they cleared the path of the donkey's feet, and Jacob looked up to come face to face with this man everyone had been celebrating. At this moment in the story, Jacob grew quiet. I took it as he was pausing to take a breath, so I jumped on the opportunity to tell him how upset I was for what he had done. I told him of everything that had transpired here at home, about mother crying and father having to run damage control. I griped about how my day was going to be ruined because I was tasked with finding him and would now have to babysit him. I reminded him of how irresponsible he had been and how his actions could impact our family. I didn't care how dejected his face looked. All I could see was the thorn in my side that he had so selfishly become. Without letting him finish his little story, I probably sent him over to Sarah's to tell Mother that he was all right. And then I went and found Asher and asked him to go to the temple stairs and relay the message to Father. I wasn't going anywhere today. It had become my job to make sure Jacob was no more of an embarrassment to our family than he already was.
I woke that morning with Hannah tucked tightly against me as the embers of our campfire had dwindled overnight. Sounds from other tents told me that the rising sun was bringing the start of a new day for all of us that had arrived back at the campsite late after the celebrations at the gate yesterday. As I rose, the events of yesterday felt like a dream. How many centuries had we waited for him? How much had God's chosen people suffered at the hands of the nations set to destroy us? And there he was, at the gates of Jerusalem, triumphantly entering the city as our Savior. I had followed him for a while. I found among his people a camaraderie that I was not afforded in my hometown after my husband passed. A widowed woman with a young daughter, I didn't carry any importance in that community, and there were no prospects for my Hannah to eventually marry well. We had struggled to keep a roof over our heads and went many nights without food. Rumors preceded his arrival in our area. Many stories abounded about who he was, from prophet to healer to blasphemer to Messiah. It was hard to overlook the many miracles that had been associated with him and his followers. He healed the sick and the dying, whether they were man, woman, child, rich or poor. Never had I seen someone take time to care about women and children. That spoke volumes to me, and it was what drove me to seek out his caravan of followers when they arrived. I was astounded at the group of people that came with him. I had heard many times about his chosen disciples. They were known for doing many miracles in his name and had spoken themselves across our region. But it was the vast amount of everyday people that were with him that drew me in. And among that group, there were women like me. Women shoved to the outside of society, otherwise forgotten and abandoned. We all seemed to stay on the edge of the crowd, and we knew each other by our demure glances. Hannah and I had arrived to hear him speak and to watch him heal the sick. Standing in a secluded corner, we strained to hear his words, but the healing in his hands was impossible to miss. Men, lame from birth, jumping and celebrating the legs that could now support them. Women were crying with joy over broken limbs and injured backs being healed and pain-free for the first time. I was drawn in by the spectacle, and Hannah was just as excited as I had ever seen her. I think, even at 10 years old, she saw something in Jesus that she knew would not come from anywhere else. Amidst the celebrating, the crowd grew quiet and parted as a group of Jewish elders approached Jesus. I could hear the challenge in their voices as they questioned him. He sat there under the tree, answering their questions, and never once got riled up by their obvious baiting. The sense of calm purpose just rolled off of him, and it drew me in with such a sense of peace. As the leaders stepped back and Jesus began conversing with his disciples, I knew I wanted to get Hannah closer to what was going on. We slowly started moving into the crowd to draw closer. To my shock, I was not the only one. Other families started pressing forward, children in tow, seeking to draw closer to Jesus. Seeing the press of people moving towards them, his disciples turned and threw their hands up. They insisted that we stay back and to keep the children under control. One man from the crowd begged the disciples for Jesus to pray over his children. At that moment, Jesus stood. He put his hand on the shoulder of the one he called Simon. I would later come to know him as Peter, and spoke calmly but with great authority. "Let the little children come forward," he said. And Hannah didn't hesitate. She just ran up to him. I panicked. That was my world running away from me. But did I make a scene here in front of all of these people? I knew my place, and it wasn't important enough for anyone to care about mine or Hannah's safety. But there, under that tree, the disciples made way for Hannah and the other children to approach Jesus. He took the time to rest his hand on each child's head and lovingly gazed into their eyes. He took a deep breath and declared that these children have a place at his side, just as they have a place in the kingdom of heaven. My little Hannah, sitting next to the sons and daughters of families with living fathers to give them inheritances of their own. And Jesus said that she will inherit equally with them. My heart swelled with emotion. Of all the men in my life, this is the first one to say that. As women, we have a place to call home, a place of inheritance. It took no more than that moment to know our lives would be inextricably tied to the ministry of the man named Jesus. We'd followed him since. I sold what few possessions we had to buy a donkey for Hannah to ride as we traveled with him across the region. I was quickly introduced to other women in my position, other widows, women rescued from slavery or from prostitution. Chief among them was Mary of Magdala. She loved on my little Hannah from the moment we met. It was her tent we were sharing at this moment. Lifting my head up, I caught her eye as we both seemed to always stir with the sun each morning. She smiled at me with a knowing smile. We had both experienced something yesterday at the temple gates that we knew would change the world forever. I looked down at Hannah as she still slept and felt a sense of awe and of hope for the coming days. Our Savior is here, and life would never be the same.
A Holy Week story, When the Human and the Holy Collide, is written and produced by Kelly Duke with editing and oversight by Philip Larson. Vocal talents provided by Brett Bauer, Tony Gregory, Randy Kemp, and Mary C. Bruce. Theme music written by Danny Lee, Andy Dixon, Scott Garnan, and Stephen Gray, and performed by the West Metro Worship Collective. Background instrumentals provided by Higher Power. Discussion and insight questions by Ryan Abernathy. Sound editing by Ron Duke.